Welcome to Marriage for Better for Worse. I'm your pastor, Bob Moeller, for the next half hour, and I'd like to share with you from a biblical perspective God's answer to issues that challenge marriages, singleness, and family life. I want you to know I'm not a psychiatrist, a marriage therapist, a trained counselor. I'm a pastor that believes that love, listening, caring, prayer, and God's Word can heal relationships and hearts. Our topic, the passive male and diminishing masculinity. We live in an age where all expressions of traditional masculinity are being labeled as toxic. The only worst name you can call a man these days is, other than masculine, is to call him patriarchal. Meaning the father should serve as leader in the marriage and the home. Well, that's off limits. Militant feminists have done an outstanding job of cowering males into believing that their masculinity is the root problem behind all social inequality, suppression of women's rights, and abuse in all of its various forms. Meanwhile, the aggressive, independent, and dominant female is now presented to young women as the ideal woman. Despite all the supposed gains that militant feminism may have brought about in the last 40 or 50 years, for some odd reason, many women are still dissatisfied with their marriage and their husbands in particular. Not because they aren't woke enough to be submissive and obedient to their wives these days, but rather it's because they have become passive. They avoid commitment. They shirk responsibility and often won't pursue a meaningful career, leaving it to the wife to provide for the family. In other words, though many women have gotten what they wanted, what they feel they long deserved, namely headship, respect, and leadership in the family, they are still dissatisfied. The reason is, of course, and I think it's an obvious reason, God created men and women equal in value, importance, dignity, and respect. But He created them for different roles within the marriage and the home. In all my years as both a pastor and then later working with troubled marriages, I have yet to see a wife fulfilled, contented, and personally fruitful or blossoming when she was married to a passive male. Rather, I've heard unending complaints of laziness, an unwillingness to make important decisions, and to step up to deal with the problems that the teenagers and the children may present. If I may say this lovingly to all who are watching this program, what did you think would happen? If you criticize, denigrate, even demonize traditional masculinity, men in their fallen human nature are more than willing to default to a passive role in the family in which they become self-focused, self-absorbed, and consumed with self-pity and basically just become part of the furniture. Hey, it's a lot easier to let the wifey deal with the snarky teenager, the obnoxious neighbor next door whose dog barks day and night. It's a lot easier to let your wife take the calls from the nagging bill collector than it is for you to step up, take responsibility, and do the hard things. Things which men with a proper view of biblical masculinity used to believe was their role in the marriage. My message in this program is that we can't have it both ways. We cannot demand that men become the emotional equivalent of a cockapoo lapdog, and at the same time look to them to stand in the spiritual gap as the spiritual priest of the house, sacrifice for the good of the family, and be the shield that guards you and the children from a hostile, if not a dangerous world that's out there. You can't have it both ways. No, men should never dominate, control, or devalue their wives. Scripture forbids all such selfish, immature, and bullying behavior. 1 Peter 3 says we are to live with our wives according to knowledge. that we are to treat them with respect and to understand that their hearts are fragile and to care for those hearts. Doesn't mean women are weaker. It simply means they are different. Yet God did design men to provide, to protect, to lead a family. And if he is denied that role by the culture, by the society, even by his spouse, he will likely, in time, give up, fade into the background, and let someone else take responsibility for the family and for the children. If you don't believe me, go back to Adam in the Garden of Eden for Exhibit A of the passive male and the trouble that it leads to. So let's decide that we're going to teach our sons and our daughters that God-given, Christ-motivated, Spirit-led masculinity and femininity is not a curse, not a power play, nor is it the cause of all social evils. In fact, it is the Creator's design for fulfillment, harmony, and joy in a marriage and family. Ephesians 5:25 is as true today as when it was written. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Notice it doesn't say he gave into her. It says he gave himself up, and there's a difference. There are times we should yield to our wives, but when we give in simply to avoid all conflict, to avoid all hard moments, to avoid criticism, well, we may be in the wrong. My son is in his late 20s, and these are questions that come out of my experience, my interaction, the things that I've been asked in the course of my ministry. My son in his late 20s and is still living at home. He likes to play video games, watch sporting events with his friends, and keeps changing his career goals, if not month by month, at least year by year. Now, we enjoy his company, and he does help occasionally with babysitting the younger siblings, and he does help with some chores around the house. And my wife just says, well, he's a late bloomer. But I'm worried that by supporting him, we are enabling what looks like a prolonged, maybe never-ending adolescence. I want to give him a deadline to move out, but my wife is against it, saying he can't afford it right now. And so what should we do? Well, that scenario is all too common, is it not? I really don't believe we do men a favor when we make life easy for them. I don't think we should necessarily make it difficult or impossible. But I think we should teach young boys, teenage boys, young adult boys that life is hard. And that they were born not to kick back, not to play and to enjoy themselves. They were born to be a provider, to be a protector, to take on responsibility, to care for those that need all those things in life, namely often a wife and children. For some reason, and I think militant feminism has a role in this, young men are uncertain today what it means to be a man, what it means to be masculine. And in the presence of so many conflicting, if not degrading voices, even within the church, they've decided, hey, if my being a man or acting masculine is a problem, I'll just disappear. And I'll just have a good time and I'll hang out. And I won't worry about really doing something with my life. And as I said at the beginning of this program, that has become enormously frustrating to young women who are looking for a man who will actually be a man in their lives. I read recently that 60% of college students now are female. In many Christian colleges, the ratio of women to men is 3-to-1, in some cases 5-to-1, and in other cases even 7-to-1. What is happening in our society and in the church? Why are women willing to pursue college and advanced degrees while more and more men are choosing just to skip college altogether? What will be the impact on marriage when the wife consistently earns more than her husband? Is this a healthy trend? Well, I have certainly no objection to women pursuing higher education. In fact, I met my wife when she was pursuing a master's degree, and I admired her for that. I encouraged her. In fact, I told her we could not get married unless there was the assurance she would be able to complete her degree. So I am not against women engaging in higher education and getting the most advanced degree perhaps that they're capable of. But at the same time, while Cheryl was pursuing this advanced degree, so was I. And my assumption was that though she might pursue her career, and she did for a time after our marriage, before children, that it would fall primarily to me to be the provider, to be the protector, and to provide spiritual leadership in the home. I never felt any different. I never assumed that I could let her take care of me. Now, in some cases, illnesses and accidents require a reversal of roles, and certainly that's to be understood, and there's not a problem with that. But I do believe that God has put it in the heart of a man to be a provider, a protector, and a leader in both his marriage as well as in his home. And when he fails to do that, nothing good really comes of that. I'm going to go out on a limb in this program and tell you that in all the years of being a pastor, I never saw a marriage where the woman was the dominant individual. I'm talking about overly dominant, overly aggressive. The person where the husband was unusually passive and submissive. I never saw a marriage where either of them were happy in that. Even though both had agreed to those roles, it did not produce the harmony that I believe a marriage is supposed to produce. What's happened that men aren't going to college? Well, I think several factors have come into play. I've given a lot of thought to this, by the way, because I think it's a very disturbing trend that men are dropping out of higher education. Number one, I think the lack of fathers in the home have discouraged young men in pursuing their dreams and ambitions. The great number of divorced homes, single-parent homes, fatherless homes have skyrocketed. And with that, there seems to be a decreasing interest on the part of men in pursuing advanced education. I think a second reason is the prevalence of pornography, which is a particular temptation to young men, and particularly easy given the internet, that once a young man's heart is captured by pornography, it tends to dull all his other senses, tends to diminish his own sense of personhood, his own sense of self-respect and dignity, and puts him in this false world of false intimacy in which no one else really matters. I think another contributing factor is video games. Today, men, rather than going out in the world and fighting real battles in the marketplace, fighting, real foes, if you will, to establish themselves in a career or a job or a business, they can do it with a remote control or a clicker or a gaming device. They can fight all their battles, win heroic victories, be the man, and they never have to leave their basement. I think another reason that boys have given up on higher education in astounding numbers is militant feminism, which has said that male leadership, a man asserting himself, is the root cause of so much of the sorrow in our society. In fact, his masculinity and ambitions are toxic and need to be done away with. You can only be told that from kindergarten through high school and into college before you really may come to believe it and just decide, again, it's better that I disappear. I think this trend needs to be turned around, because eventually what you're going to have is women far more educated, far more adept to earn a significant income, and men, out of their basic need of respect, and I've heard this isn't just in my mind, men are going to go, I just can't compete with my wife on these levels. I think I won't try. I'll just leave, or I won't get married. Women may have trouble understanding why a man would think that way, but men, if they know innately that they just simply can't compete in some areas I think that they were meant to prosper in, they're going to call it game over and walk away. I come from a culture in which men often adopt the extreme macho man image of a male that includes ruling the home with an iron fist, using harsh words in the treatment of his wife and children, physical and verbal abuse as a means of discipline. My husband grew up in such a macho man home, and sometimes I see him acting out as his father did. Is this what the Bible teaches a man is to be like? If not, how can I get my husband to quit acting in such hurtful, if not abusive ways? Whenever I challenge him, he tells me I'm disrespecting him and to be quiet. Well, just you take any good characteristic that God created, if you take it to its extreme, it starts to become a problem, even an evil. Sympathy's a wonderful thing, is it? But if you take it to its extreme and you are so sympathetic that you do not discipline your children or ever have them face consequences, you are producing an antisocial child. If you take thriftiness, if you take the ability to manage your money wisely and take it to an extreme, you soon have a greedy Ebenezer Scrooge-like person who has become an idolater. You see, while men are to exhibit leadership, while they are to exhibit discipline within the home, while they are to provide an example of firm but loving boundaries, take that to an extreme and you create a monster, and you create heartbroken wives and children. And so if the devil can't get us to abandon certain virtues, he just has us take them to an extreme. And then they're nullified and they become a mean of destruction. If you want to look at the ultimate macho man, look at Jesus. Well, he, on one hand, drove out the temple money changers with a whip and cords and overturned tables. On the other hand, he took children on his lap and blessed them. He cared for widows in their distress. He wept by the grave of a dear friend. He comforted mourning sisters. I mean, you look at Jesus, he was anything but harsh, cruel, tyrannical, dictatorial in how he treated people. Ultimately, he laid his life down. You see, what's going on in our culture is that masculinity is being caricaturized. It's being taken to its worst and most extreme forms to dismiss the entire package. And so what's being done is to demonize masculinity by pointing out its most dysfunctional or aberrant expressions, when in fact that's not the way most men are, and it's certainly not the way Christ modeled manhood for us. What are you to do? You need to seek help. And your husband needs to seek help, because if he continues his abusive, tyrannical way, eventually it's going to destroy your heart, to destroy the heart of your children, and probably will result in the end of the marriage. I recently heard a sermon on the passive male and the dangers of self-pity. It seems in the Old Testament, King Ahab of Israel wanted to buy a vineyard from a man named Naboth. When Naboth refused to sell him the property, because it was against the Old Testament law to sell family property outside the family, the king went home and pouted and felt very sorry for himself. His wife Jezebel then hatched a plan to have Naboth falsely accused and then stoned to death. After Naboth was wrongly executed, she turned the vineyard over to her husband, who was responsible for the innocent man's death. Now, whose blame does it really fall to, Ahab or Jezebel? What is the relationship between passivity and self-pity for men, and what's the cure? You know, I heard a sermon on this recently, or read an article, and I had never really made the association between a passive male and self-pity. But a man who is passive, who is willing to let others make hard decisions, who does fail to step up, he's often going to be consumed with feeling sorry for himself. Oh, woe is me, woe is my life. How many men listening to this program are filled with self-pity? Because, in fact, the world has treated you badly or circumstances have gone wrongly. But let me ask you the question, did you ever step up? Did you ever challenge those circumstances? Did you ever, in love, put yourself out on the line and say, I don't think I'm going to take this anymore? I'm not talking about getting crazy or violent or shouting. I'm just talking about stepping up and standing up for what you should. Men who have learned to be assertive, I'm not talking about being aggressive, but have learned to be assertive, seldom suffer from self-pity. Because if something's wrong, they address it. And even if it doesn't go their way, they have at least the knowledge that I tried and I stood up for myself or I stood up for my family. Let me just suggest that the real culprit in this case was not Jezebel, who murdered Naboth, although she certainly had blood on her hands. It was Ahab who let her get away with all this and who refused to seek a godly solution to this problem that he was upset about. He should have known from the Old Testament law that land wasn't his, and perhaps he should have made an arrangement with Naboth where he would pay him top dollar for the produce of that vineyard so he could still enjoy its fruits. There's a lot of ways that he could have done this righteously, but in his passivity, he allowed someone else to pick up his responsibility and to commit evil. One of the arguments a committed feminist at work uses against Christianity is that if Jesus was God and Jesus was a male, then males are God. And she rejects that. How should I answer her? Well, first of all, the Bible does not say that all males are God. In fact, only Jesus was truly God. And yes, he was born a man, and God had a specific purpose in that he would be a model of spiritual leadership, spiritual sacrifice, other things that our husbands are meant to be. But notice that within the Trinity, there is also the Holy Spirit, the Comforter, the one who comes alongside us, the one who speaks to our wounds, who nurtures us, who is gentle with us. You see, within the Godhead, all the traits of masculinity and femininity are found. The book of Genesis says, in the beginning, God created male and female. Male and female, he created them in the image of God. So the Bible does not teach that only in a man can you find the image of God. You find in the creation both men and women reflecting the image of God. And within the Godhead, you find that the Holy Spirit in particular has many of those feminine virtues and traits, wonderful virtues and traits. And so in the Godhead, there is a great balance. But to say that the Bible teaches men are gods and women are something less is simply false. Why did men in my father's generation see a man's role in the world to marry early, raise a family, purchase a house, provide for his children, and stay married for a lifetime? Today, I see young men postponing marriage until their late 30s. They're reluctant to buy a home. They want to only have 1 or 2 children, if any children at all. And they see marriage as a flexible contract that either party should be able to leave if they're unhappy. What has happened? Well, what has happened is that we have adopted a secular view of marriage. We have replaced biblical marriage with our idea of what is the best marriage. Previous generations, and I was just reading again about this, the purpose of marriage was often built around obligation, duty, and sacrifice. In other words, people got married in the 1800s and the 1700s, not just out of a sense of romantic love or a search for fulfillment or intimacy. They were looking to fulfill an obligation, duty, sacrifice. And as such, they didn't have the same expectations of marriage as we do today. It was only in the 20th century that we abandoned that view in pursuit of self-fulfillment and intimacy and happiness as the primary reasons why we get married. And frankly, the scriptures do not teach that that is necessarily the primary reason for marriage. As one writer put it, in his book, Sacred Marriage, What if God intended marriage to make us more holy than it makes us happy? And that's a really challenging question, because I believe marriage is primarily meant to conform us to the image of Christ. And in doing so, that requires sacrifice. It requires duty. It requires surrender, and requires a lot of things we don't necessarily want to do. But you know what? Out of that comes joy. Out of that comes fulfillment. Out of that can even come happiness. So you see, I think we just have the cart backward today, and as a result, marriage is trying to carry freight it was never designed to haul. My husband is so involved at work and is a manager with numerous responsibilities. All his co-workers admire him, yet when he comes home, he seems to change personality, just sits in front of his computer, works on his phone. When he's not taking calls, he's watching sports. Why is he a leader at work, but anything but a leader at home? Why the difference between work and home? You know something, I believe that the primary reason for that is modeling. The chances are he grew up in a home where his father worked all the time and asserted himself there, and left the home to the mother, that she was the one to raise the kids and provide for emotional needs. And he just doesn't feel equipped to do it. And when men don't feel equipped to do it, they won't try. They don't take on contests that they know they're going to lose ahead of time. Now, of course, the answer is modeling. If he had a poor model, he needs a good model of an involved husband, of one who is immersed in the life of the family, who's a leader at home, not just at work. And that may require being part of a men's small group, may require attending classes, weekends, being involved in men's ministry, where he really begins to see what it means to be a loving and involved father at home. Well, our time is almost gone. This half hour seems to go so quickly, doesn't it? We so appreciate you watching our program. If you want to see it again, it will be posted on our YouTube channel. You can just simply go to Bob Moeller at the YouTube channel, and you'll find all the programs that we've done posted there for you to enjoy or send on. Until next week, remember, marriage is for better, for worse, and for keeps.